First item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes for April 22nd. Do I hear a motion?
Move approval of the minutes of our meeting on the 22nd of April.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Second one is approval of the special meeting minutes on May the 16th.
Move approval of the minutes of the special meeting we held on May 16th.
I'll second that.
Okay, for the motion and second to approve the special meeting minutes on May 16th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comments. These are topics not on the agenda, and you're limited to 3 minutes. In your conversation. So do we have a list of people on?
We do have a list of people, Mr. Chair. The first on the list is Mayor Patansu from the city of Orchard.
Mayor?
Good evening. Earlier
Elected to a new term.
I am.
So we'll be seeing a lot more of you.
I certainly hope so. So I earlier today emailed Mike a copy of the letter. Hopefully it was provided to all of you, or will be. I brought a copy if you need it.
It will be. I did not receive it in time to get it in their hands.
Okay. I will at least hand you that letter then. And I won't read this 2-page letter to you, but I'll hit a couple of the high points of it. So as you know, the city of Port Orchard, Kitsap County, and the Port of Bremerton have all passed resolutions of support for the South Kitsap Community Center project. After we passed those resolutions, I facilitated a meeting with Commissioner Stokes and Commissioner Garrido, and I came away from that meeting knowing that I and the city are going to need to have a much larger leadership role, even though they all are joining the city in this project. I've just also had discussion with my city council that we will likely be the lead public partner in this project. We believe that funding a feasibility study is the next logical step in this process, which is outlined in my letter. But we don't want to perform that work until we know the amount of the award that the Public Facilities District is going to make. We don't want to scope and design a project beyond what we could afford. We're asking for, when you make your decisions, for a commitment from the Public Facilities District that is phased. And after the award is made, we would go out to bid on that feasibility study to be funded by the Public Facilities District. Upon completion of the study, we will raise the necessary funds to complete the project, and we would not ask for the remaining commitment until we completely raised all of the funds necessary to build the project. You know, as I've said before, we have a project for us that will transform downtown Port Orchard. It checks all the boxes, I believe: economic development, jobs, housing, and recreation. So please find a way to move our project forward and fund the community center. So, if you have any questions for me, I'm here to answer them for you.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions for the mayor?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Mayor. And next on the left, Mr. Steve Segal.
Well, I'd just like to follow up. Again, I'm Steve Segal, and you know me from presentations we've been making here over the last, seems like a year. I'm not sure how long it's been. But in any event, I want to follow up on what Mayor Patansu shared and kind of specifically address the role of myself and the people I'm working with on this project. And as the mayor's described, when we made our presentation on this proposal a few months ago, we had one public partner. Now we have 3. They've all agreed in writing to be public partners and resolved to commit to help fund and help the operations, long-term operations, and find that source to make that happen. And as the mayor described, the city is likely to evolve into that lead role, depending upon the relationships as this discussion continues. But from my perspective, our perspective with my companies that I work with who've been working on this for the last year, I just wanted to let you know that we defer to the public partnerships. We are here to support and serve this project however possible, and that means we'll get our hands dirty as authorized and directed by the public partners. We'll remain a point of contact, again, as authorized by our public partner, and hopefully as this project in the next month becomes more clear in terms of your commitment for the next steps, that process will be in the control of the city of Portraiture, I believe, and then we'll support that process however necessary. So with that, I just want to make clear we're still here at the table. We're going to do whatever we can to keep this moving, but we want to make certain that we follow procedurally what's appropriate for the protocol of the PFG and the public partnerships. Any questions for me or concerns?
Thank you, Steve.
Great, thank you.
Any questions for Steve?
So the public partners are the city, the port, and the Kitsap County.
Yes, and they had individually legislative votes by the commissions of the two, port and the county, and the city council of the city of Portraiture, and they were unanimously passed in all three bodies. And I've
So,
shared
you
those-
know, like, for instance, we've had the port endorse another project as well. So, you know, it's pretty easy to endorse projects until you have to put
Yeah.
money on projects.
It's not an endorsement, it's a resolution indicating a public partnership, a specific public partnership per the parameters and protocol of your agency, and a commitment to support financially with that partnership the delta between whatever funding you might provide and the necessary next steps. So this is specific to us. We're not involved in any other project. This is the Portraiture South Kitsap Community Event Center project, and the port and the city and the county are working together to make certain that project is funded and operated, and there's an underlying ownership. Because you asked me that question when I made my presentation. Who is going to be the underlying owner? Who's going to take the obligation, responsibility for the funding? I bring you that answer.
The city.
The city, the county, the port, with the city as the
City
lead
is
is
the
our
lead.
hope.
Yeah. If I may add to that, and when I talked with Commissioner Garrido and Mr. Stokes, well, it won't be easy. The easier part of this is building it. And when I went and toured the facility in Kingston, it's the ongoing operations and maintenance. That is these type of facilities don't make money, and you're fooling yourself if you think they do. The Bremerton Conference Center loses $100,000 a year. The Kingston facility loses $200,000 a year, and we need to have some making sure all of our and when we've sent all past resolutions of support. That's where that feasibility study is so important, knowing who we're confident a library is probably a third of this. It is a third of this. A conference center is a third, and we don't know what that other third is. Is it the Boys and Girls Club? Is it? I don't know, and that's what we've got to figure out. And then you're dividing up those operational costs between those who's utilizing the space, and that's the part we don't know yet. And until we have that feasibility study, but we're all committed to the project. We all see the economic benefits and the lift that will provide the city, additional tax revenues. There's all kinds of reasons to do this, but we got a lot of unanswered questions at this point.
And I'll add, the next step as part of the feasibility study is a pro forma to identify those revenue streams that fund the operations. And one of the commitments we made to you when we presented, as part of our ongoing partnership, is to develop at least a 10-year funding plan so that we have funds identified ahead of time, not when we get into a tough spot in 5 years. And we're going to do that. Thank
Well, I
you.
appreciate that you were advised that was a key deficiency in this project. As desirable as the project may be, that was still going to be a negative that had to be overcome, and I applaud you for having overcome it. It's a very substantial and satisfactory public partners arrayed with your project.
Thank you, Mike. And if there's any other deficiencies that we should know about, we'll resolve them. Just let us know and we'll get this done. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
And the third person on the list is Brian Nilsson from
Hi,
Circuit
good
of the
evening.
Northwest.
Good evening, Brian Nilsson from Circuit of the Northwest. Last meeting, April 22nd, CNW has asked a direct question from Board Chair Darren Jabotinsky. And what I've done is prepared a document that has where the public funding will go. And on the master plan, it's numbered. And so he was talking about funding levels. So I'd like to submit this to the board if I could. That spells it out in black and white.
Thank you, Brian.
And I'm available for any questions further than that, but that should clear up his concern and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian? Okay. Okay, and that's the last.
Correct. That is the last signed up speaker.
All right, so we'll move on to item number 4, the financial report. Mike?
Yeah, and you know what? I didn't get one of the items into my packet, so I apologize.
Look at the report.
The treasurer,
Revenue?
not, yeah, it's not in your
No,
packet.
but I made a copy for myself, which you will use. Figure out what I did with that. Here it is.
Thank you. Yeah, the revenue received for the month of April was $116,800 and change. It's actually down 1.8% from last year. This is we've seen some, let's see, 3 occurrences in the last 6 months of single-digit increases instead of the double digits we've seen for the last year. This is the first one which is negative, which is actually down from last year's numbers. So again, I've been looking at this as what the trend is, and basically it's been flattening, and now it's taken a slight dip. We'll see whether or not, again, that
What month
is a
is that?
trend.
What month is that for?
That is April, which means it's February.
February.
Now, that's typically a down month anyway, from the first 3 months of the year that reflect the last quarter of last year, of the previous year. So this is February's numbers, and so that's weak now. That was also the snow month. We had snowmageddon in February. So that could account for that dip. If we see that come back up again in the May numbers, then we'll know that that's a weather aberration instead of a downward trend. So just a heads up, I'll be looking for it and report it next month. I'll approximate the other numbers are operations from the month of April were 19.6 thousand. And there was also, of course, the $70,000 debt service. That's $89,000 out of the 116. So that's about $28,000 going to net to cash. And again, it's a little lower than the typical months have been. The other reports you have, the blue one is basically the performance. So the first two columns, the April 19 column is the actuals for the month. And so that's where those numbers are reflected. And then the second page that you have is the color-coded page. It shows the residual in the funds. And as I've mentioned before, the 286 fund is the debt service fund. The 966 fund is actually the fairgrounds fund. And there's some residual in there that is basically left over from what we committed to the Lobie Field improvements that were done about a year and a half ago.
Is that ever gonna get done, or should we sweep that money up?
Well, I gotta get back to Billy and ask if she's got any more invoices that are gonna come out of the work that they did. If not, then yeah, we'll sweep that up. The 967 fund is, that's the conference center fund. And then the 968 is our operations fund. The 976 no, the 976 is the conference center fund. 967 is the North Kitsap fund.
You think we could put in parentheses at the top of these, what they are, conference
Okay.
center, fairgrounds,
Yeah.
whatever, then we won't have to memorize all the numbers. And you should try and find a smaller type font too.
I can make it bigger. I tried to get it on one page so that it was a little more condensed, but maybe it's a little too condensed.
Yeah, for some of it.
It's so condensed, no one can read it.
Yeah. Okay, I will take that into consideration. The 977 fund, of course, is the cash fund, or that's where the receipts, the treasury rebates, or the state rebates come into, and that we dispense out of. We transfer money to the 968 fund, which is operations, so that our month-to-months come out of that fund only. Currently, for instance, we have a Port of Bremerton Circuit of the Northwest disbursement. That will come out of the 977 fund at this point, because we don't have a committed project there. And what will happen with any of the projects that we're considering that we will make a commitment to, I will create a separate fund for each of those projects. And this will get a little more complicated. The type will get smaller. And we'll have more colors on it for each of the projects. And when we make a commitment, then we'll, if we have the funds, we'll make that transfer. With many of the projects, the actual transfer of funds will be months or a year or two in the future. And when we have a committed project, a committed plan, a committed start of construction date, then I'll make sure that we have a fund that we will be able to take derivations from our bond sales into that fund so that we can support the construction of that project. But again, that's months or years in the future, but just so that you understand what the process will be for this fund sheet and how it will change.
So So Mike, is our discretionary income, the 2.662 in the 977 fund, less commitment we've made to Circuit of the Northwest?
Circuit of the Northwest, and technically a commitment to the Parks Department for the project at Lobie Field to turf that project. It hasn't been put in there because they don't have a committed project yet, but when they came to us and said, we want to know if you're going to support this and at what level, the board decided to commit $500,000 to that, and they have been using that as part of their package that they've gone to the state and other places for grant applications and so on. And they're also looking for private partners to participate in that and so on.
So we have the 2.662 less approximately $1 million.
Correct. So, like we have done with the both the feasibility study and the architectural and engineering drawings for the Circuit of the Northwest project, we may be able to take funds from that available money to do a feasibility study for somebody else if the board decides that that's the appropriate way to handle the progression of any of the other projects.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Walt. Okay.
Blanket vouchers.
We have two blanket vouchers. One is for the typical operational items, legal services, expenses, bookkeeping. You'll notice a couple of charges for telephone and internet because I made a change from CenturyLink to Comcast for our telephone and internet. So you see a closing bill from CenturyLink and a higher installation bill for Comcast. That cost will be, I think, around $130 a month. It will be $140 a month, something like that. It will be higher because I'm paying for more bandwidth. Basically, I was getting something on the order of 5 to 10 megabits per second download with CenturyLink, and I will be getting 75 megabits per second download from Comcast and significantly greater upload of around 15 megabits per second. And if we're going to continue handling video files in order to keep records and make them available to the public, I need them to transfer faster than 24 hours to wait for a file to upload. The other, down at the toward the bottom, you'll see two meeting space rentals. The meeting space for May was a typical rental at $268. The one above that for April was when we had a sumptuous feast in order to cover a large audience. It was an attempt by exploring what the costs are and whether or not it's going to be reasonable. It was considerably higher, virtually double what our normal meeting costs were. So unless there's a really special occasion, you're likely not to see a feast like that again for a while, unless the board decides that they prefer it that way and they're willing to authorize me to pay more for the the rental and the eating there for it. But that's for you to consider and let me know. So that's the $2,857.25 for that blanket voucher.
Do we need a motion to approve that?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the blanket voucher for $2,857.25.
I'll second that.
Okay, heard the motion and the second to approve the blanket voucher. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, item number C.
Okay, the second blanket voucher is for another in the series, look for the red tags there, thanks, Walt. For a continuing invoice for both the consulting services and the professional services on the phase number 2 performance. The total amount is $72,215, broken down as $19,760 as consulting services, $52,455 for the professional services, and that's the technical drawings and architectural drawings and so on.
These were approved by the board, is that correct?
Yes,
Today's the 20th.
20th.
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve the blanket voucher for the Port of Bremerton Circuit of the Northwest project?
I have a question.
Okay.
So this comes out of the 500 and whatever that we had previously
Correct.
approved.
Yeah.
I would second.
Nope, we need a motion.
Move approval.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded to approve the voucher for the Port of Bremerton Circuit of the Northwest project. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, new business.
I have noted here for you to sign that, so I don't see my signature authority on these items.
New business. PRA.
Yep. Brian, you're on.
That would be me. So, this is actually not new business, this is kind of ongoing business.
That's true.
In the second half of 2017, I came and did a presentation on the Public Records Act, noting that although the PFD had adopted some public records rules in 2002, it wasn't really an active item. The PFD was fortunate is the right word, to receive maybe one PRA request a year, if that. Fast forward to 2017, I brought kind of a couple notions to you. One was PRA compliance is much more of a litigated item now. It's just the volume of lawsuits I see in my practice over PRA issues has grown, and it means any agency really needs to stay vigilant and stay focused on the rules, even if they're not used very much. Number two, the legislature actually made some changes to the PRA in 2017 that were meaningful. In that when you consider the range of government agencies that are subject to the PRA, first of all, it's everybody, but they run from agencies like the City of Seattle or King County or any state department, any department of the state, which have huge budgets for PRA. They have whole staffs. The city of Seattle, I think, has 10 people who work on PRA stuff, and they have expensive software, and because of the volume of things they get. So they can budget to spend, a ton of money on PRA issues. You go to the other end of the spectrum, and there are small state agencies or local government agencies, like the Kitsap County Public Facilities District, that doesn't even have one full-time employee, let alone resources and staff to do all the things that the laws seem to require. So in 2017, the legislative amendments created some new burdens, but at the same time, for the first time, they created some opt-outs for smaller agencies. So it was, to me, important that we look at being able to use those opt-outs and not get stuck in compliance measures that would be costly and not necessarily useful. So we talked about that in 2017. We talked about some other issues. We confirmed that we had a public records officer, which is the executive director. And then I told you I wanted some period of time, which was roughly going to be a year, to see how the new legislation was being played out. Part of that was the Attorney General's office was coming up with new guidelines, and it took them about 9 or 12 months to decide how they wanted to play the new legislative amendments. There's also a resource I use as a lawyer with my municipal clients called the MRSC, the Municipal Research Service Corporation, which does a lot of analysis of legislation and creates various guidelines and tools for agencies. And so basically I said, let me see how this thing settles out, and then I would like to come back to you with proposed new rules, which I did. I think originally we were going to do it last fall, but Ford was quite busy with other matters. We brought this back again on February 25th. I kind of did a walkthrough then of what the changes are, and basically said anywhere in the new legislation where there's an opt-out for a small jurisdiction to have fewer duties and fewer expenses, I have built that into your regulations and use the language, which I think we need to do to put that in there. In addition, we needed to create a review process that the new statute requires that. That is, if the public records officer or executive director makes a denial of a request, rather than the requester having to immediately make a decision whether to go to court or not, they have the right to petition that agency, someone else in that agency, to review the public records officer's determination. So we looked into that, and because it's an expedited review, it didn't make sense to appoint the board as the review body, but rather to ask the president of the board to be in that position of reviewing a request denial, because the turnaround time is like 3 business days or something, so it just wasn't really practical to ask the board to do that. So we built that in, and of course that means that if the president needs legal assistance, he or she would have access to the board's legal counsel on that. So that in a nutshell is what the new rules were that we brought to you on February 25th, and I understood then that everybody wanted a chance to look at them and so on. So hopefully I can answer any questions that you have tonight, and otherwise I look forward to getting these passed, if not tonight, maybe at the next meeting, preferably tonight.
Is there any questions for Brian?
So, Brian, is it this proposed regulation that gave rise to the need to create this new email system that we're using rather than all our personal emails?
That's not a statutory requirement, but it's become a best practices issue.
Makes it easier to collect stuff.
Yeah. And then the courts, independent of what the statute says, the courts are interpreting the PRA. Every couple of months, I'm reading new decisions where the court is expanding what is in the statute, and the courts are saying time and time again, don't use personal email. because it's not official, doesn't look like an official communication, it looks like an effort to get around official communications, and therefore and jurisdictions have been sued over that, and some in Kitsap County, some in the community where I live, paid a $500,000 fine for city council members who were conducting business on their personal email accounts. So the best practice now is just don't expose yourself or your board to that risk. Use, create, as Mike has done, create an official email set for board members.
Maybe a pain in the ass, but it'll cover ours.
Yeah.
So, do you recall, does anybody recall, we have 3 board members, with 2 board members that aren't here tonight, Aaron and Darren. Do you know, were they concerned about anything that, with these rules? The reason I'm asking is do we want to take action tonight to approve them, or do we want to wait till Darren and Aaron are present?
Well, do we have everything we need to take action tonight?
You do. And with
Then-
respect to, I'll just comment, Darren has not commented to me one way or the other on them. Aaron did after the February 25th meeting. She had a couple questions, which I think I answered, and then with her normal eagle eyes, she had found, a typo or a comma where a period should be.
Your
or something.
grammar was lacking.
Yeah, exactly. I can read something 20 times and miss something, and my office can read it 20 times and miss it, but she finds it. So I did correct whatever mistakes were of that nature.
So the best of your knowledge, Darren and Aaron have no more.
To the best of my knowledge, yes. Yeah.
We've been kind of putting this off for a while. We should
Yes.
probably get it done.
I agree. I think obviously it's something that we need to get done, and it's common sense.
Yeah.
I think the rules are so arcane that we're not going to be any smarter about them a month from now.
Okay.
So do we just need a motion to
Correct.
repeal and replace the PRA rules that we?
Yeah, it is a repeal and replace in that it acknowledges we have older rules. We're going to repeal those and replace it with a different set of rules.
So I'll make a motion that we repeal the old set of PRA rules and replace them with the new set that our legal counsel has developed.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, you heard the motion and the second to repeal our old PRA rules and replace them with new rules that have been recommended by our staff and by our attorney. Any questions? Okay, you ready for the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Thank you, Brian.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel better now.
I do.
Okay, so let me just ask, I believe part of the, our responsibility as a board is to be, to pass the test. I believe that Mike sent the email out a while back of the link to the website where you take the test, and how many people have done that so far?
Yeah, put your hands up.
Okay. I believe Aaron has done it.
Aaron has done it, Walt has done it.
So,
Right.
so we need
I
to
don't
do that.
recall. Yeah.
We need to do that.
Could you send that link again?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I have a question about that. So I've gone through the first 2 modules. Is the test then at the end?
Yeah.
It's a little bit confusing, the Attorney General Office website.
Most of it is just a compliance with the fact that you've read it. And yeah, there are some questions at the end, but it's not onerous. But most of it is that you have read through till the end of the training, and this certifies that you have taken the training.
Okay.
And watch the videos.
Yeah.
So resend out that link so that everybody has.
I will. All right.
Now, do you want, there's a thing there where you can print a
Certification.
certification sheet, or you can print a listing of where you enter names on it. What do you want us to do?
Yeah.
Print the certification sheet and send it to you?
Right.
Okay, everybody hear that? Okay, the second question or thing I want to raise is the issue of the email address with the public facility district. I understand there are board members that have not completed that process, is that true?
Now they have all completed the
Okay.
process, and at one point, Pat, unfortunately, I sent him the wrong link to start with, and so I'm sure he was really frustrated. 'Cause
I tried.
Yes,
All right,
but you've
I'm good
accessed it
now.
now.
Yes.
Yeah.
okay, so everybody's set up on that?
Yeah. You're okay with it, Rick?
Yep.
Because I've gotten replies from you, so it
Yep.
looks like you're set up and ready to go. Yeah.
Okay.
Then we're all good.
All right, cool. All right, let's move on to item number 6, bonding and finance update.
All right. We are very pleased to have a couple of real experts in the field. These are companies that both Brian and I have talked with and met with individually. As a acknowledgement, we have a letter with each one of these organizations as a non-binding agreement to be able to pursue and exchange information in order to make a determination of which of them may play the most important role, which is the bond underwriter. But there are about 4 or 5 different roles that other companies and individuals may be able to play in the process. But the most important is the bond underwriter, because they're the one that makes sure that any bonds that are issued under our name get sold. So we have 2 of those individuals here today. I've been advised that it's appropriate that when one is making a presentation, the other should probably be out of the room so that there are no exposures of information that may be privileged or confidential. So on our agenda, Caitlin Caldwell is up first, and we'll excuse David until a little bit later. Thank you, David.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
The video, see the whole thing in there. The other guy, just be able to look at the video and see the whole thing.
Right. I updated it, but
You can make it leave, can you?
Is this the same one we saw before?
it's very close.
Okay.
I updated. How much time do you have?
How much time do you need?
Well, I don't want to put everyone to sleep here, but.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
I had allotted like 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, that's helpful. I will take about 10 minutes to walk through this slide deck here. And then I'll probably pause and want to answer questions in a lot of time. So there may be some items in here that aren't covered. So just from the outset, this book is pretty comprehensive. There's quite a bit of information in it. It was a presentation that my colleague Jeff Rubin and I gave to Mike and Brian, and Bill was there as well, back in December, about financing options and the path forward.
I think it was Darren at that time.
Oh, you're right. No, I
No, I was here.
and Darren was there as well.
Yeah, both of you.
I know
Both
we
of
met.
them. Oh, okay, that's right.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that.
So again, it's pretty comprehensive. I'll try to hit the high points. Always feel free to pause. I'm happy to answer any question that you might have. So we'll start on slide 3 if you want to skip the first 2 pages. And when we had met with Mike and Brian before, we understand that we're on the outset right now of a longer process, right? There's still a lot of that pieces that need to fall into place here. So we looked at, sort of put this executive summary together and said, okay, 30,000 foot level, what are our goals here? What are our objectives? And how do we have a path forward? So you already know most of what's on page 3 here, but the PFD currently has 3 quote-unquote regional facilities that were financed with the 2011 bonds. Now that is important later in the presentation, so that's why I brought it up. But really why we're here today is to define how much the PFD really could fund, right? What type of projects and how much you really could fund. So that's our goal, and that's what we've tried to outline here. But before we jump into that, there are some considerations that we need to address. So moving on to slide 4. We've got a few updates here regarding PFD financing. So things that have happened in the past 18 months or so that are going to be pretty impactful to PFD specifically, and then also just generally issuers of tax-exempt debt. On the very left-hand side, you're all aware, HB 1201 extended sales tax. But what's important in that language is that when any new debt is issued, any debt from the original facility must be outstanding. So if we want to have debt outstanding into 2041, if we want to use all those available revenues and capture all of that capacity, if you will, we need to essentially have debt from the original projects outstanding in 2041. So we're going to cover this more, but it's a really important concept as we move through the slide deck. Any questions so far?
So we have to extend the term of the original debt.
Exactly,
Right.
you got it. And we'll talk about that. But before we do jump into that, on the right-hand side, other considerations that are also going to play an important role. Of course, the credit support agreement, whether it's the contingent loan agreement, whether it's an interlocal agreement, or whether a entity such as the county or city, whatever that may be, issues on behalf of the PFD. There are some updates there that you may need to consider. And then the Department of Commerce review, I talked to Mike about this. We just completed a financing for a PFD, and the process was very lengthy. So just want to say from the outset,
Yep.
keep that in mind. You have to commission, once the project has been chosen, you have to commission a feasibility study, a third-party study, and then from there's a 4 to 6 week final review period once the study was completed. So it's a multi-month process. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of on the outset.
Yep.
And then final bullet point, in January of 2017, the President Trump's 2017 Tax and Jobs Cut Act, there's one huge limiting factor in that bill for municipalities. And anyone that issues tax-exempt debt can no longer, what we call, advance refund their tax-exempt debt. And we'll get into why that's important later on. But essentially, before, municipalities would issue tax-exempt debt, and you had one option to refinance those bonds before the call date. So let's just say in 2011, the county issued bonds on behalf of the PFD. Those bonds had a 10-year call date. So in 2021, the county has the option to refinance those bonds. Not the obligation, but the option. It used to be able to refinance those bonds one time before 2021. Now that option is gone, okay? With tax-exempt bonds again.
Okay.
If you want to refinance
Only with tax-exempt.
so if you issue tax-exempt bonds with a 10-year call option, you cannot refund those bonds with new tax-exempt bonds until that 10-year mark. That's important here because, as you'll go through the presentation, what we just noted, that the county needs to refinance those bonds in order for the PFD to sell new bonds. There's going to be some implications there. So, moving forward, unless anyone has any questions. Okay. So slide 5 is a snapshot of what the county currently has outstanding, and we've listed here our understanding of the PFD's portion of that debt. We did work with Mike and got some of the bond documents given to us, so we were able to dig through those and garner that of the outstanding 10.9 million or so, 11 million or so, the PFD's portion is about $5.8 million outstanding. And the callable amount of that debt, so the amount of the debt that could be called and refinanced, is about $6.7 million, and the PFD's portion was about $3.8 million. These have not been reviewed by any tax counsel, but this is our cursory review. And then the last big.
Yeah, just a point. When they refunded those bonds, that was at the county's preference, and it was their benefit from that. Because we were a part of that bond, we also benefited from that because they lowered the interest rate in that refunding, and that lowered our debt service by about $10,000 a month. That was in the middle of a recession, and that also made it much more affordable for us to continue operations without cutting back any further on expenses or staff or anything else. So that was beneficial, but it was mainly beneficial for the county to reduce that, and we benefited as well. So they're not necessarily looking out for us. We get a benefit if they're looking out for themselves.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll just note here, if you look at the bottom of slide 5, we've listed all the details here, but the key point there under call date, December 1, 2021. So that is the date that these bonds can be refinanced with new tax-exempt bonds. Okay. So, and really it's about 90 days before that. So backing up from December 1, 2021, that puts us at September 1, 2021. That those bonds could be refunded with tax-exempt bonds.
So does that mean we can't sell additional bonds until then?
Great question. And I will answer that on the next page. It's a great segue. So we'd already talked about this. The PFD's debt must be restructured prior to issuance. Now, not all of the bonds need to be restructured, but a portion of them do. And there's actually 2 different reasons. So one is the reason that we already talked about, really that the bond investors want to know that if they're going to be selling bonds that are secured by the sales tax rebate out until 2041, that sales tax is going to be there in 2041. They're not going to just take the county's word for it that the county will refinance those bonds, right? They want to know when they buy your bonds that those monies are secured and that you cleared all the hurdles that you'll need to do to be able to pay them back. The other thing is that the way that the debt is currently structured and our projections of the sales tax, there is what we call a pinch point, which doesn't allow us to sell all the bonds we could without restructuring some of these bonds. So it's kind of hard to show without a graph, but take my word for it and I can explain a little bit further later. So the bottom line is that we need to refinance at least a minimum of about 50% of those outstanding bonds to be able to really use all of your outstanding debt capacity and to be able to make bondholders comfortable with buying your bonds. Investors, I should say.
Okay, the existing bonds now are tax exempt?
They are tax exempt.
Okay.
Yep. So pass forward here, about line 2 on the bottom. So option 1, you can wait until the 2011 bonds, I guess, call option has become, active and exercisable. Thank you, Mike. In September of 2021. Okay, so it's a little bit of a ways out. Option 2 is that you can issue taxable bonds. So you can always restructure the bonds with taxable bonds, but the IRS, because of the change to the tax code, does not want issuers to have 2 sets of tax-exempt bonds outstanding, so you have to issue taxable bonds instead. So of course, taxable bonds carry a slightly higher interest rate cost, but we'll get into that a little bit more later, what that penalty looks like. And there are some other considerations with regard to taxable bonds that may apply to the PFD's financing regardless. So.
Now, this would be an offering by the PFD to retire these bonds. Is that possible?
It's a great question.
Or does it have to be done through the county?
It's a great question. So I would want to consult with bond counsel, but our read is that the PFD could sell bonds and then essentially ask the county to defease those older bonds.
Okay.
Again, would want to get tax counsel to sign off on it. But yes.
So do we know what the county's thinking about doing with their portion of those bonds when 2021 comes?
I have not had any conversations with the county. I don't know, Mike, but my hunch would be that if there are debt service savings, so if interest rates have dropped, which usually they will, 95% of bonds are refunded at some point, and that call option is
So
exercised.
chances are
So
the
the
county will do
chances
their
are they
piece
will.
of it as well.
Exactly. It's a great question.
Yeah, but to answer your other question, I have asked Ed and Meredith to meet with us again. I have not gotten a reply, so I think that inquiry or request to meet needs to come from the board chair, because I haven't gotten any leverage yet.
Okay. So that was the big picture, sort of first hurdle that I want to make everyone aware of, but that before the county, before the PFD can issue any new bonds, we have to tackle this issue, right? So option, or I guess.
And we have to guarantee that we get the supply of income all the way to 2041. That's got to be taken care of. Otherwise, we're out of business in 2026.
So moving into slide 7, sort of putting that whole thought away, and looking at, okay, we know we have the sales tax rebate monies we want to stretch as far as we can. What are the other considerations that we should be thinking about before we sell bonds? So we've outlined a few different considerations here, and I don't want to go into all too much detail because there's quite a bit here. But when Mike and when Brian approached us, the thought was, hey, we're looking at a number of projects, and we don't know exactly what the cost may be. We don't know whether these projects may be considered for private use from the IRS perspective, which would mean a taxable bond issuance versus a tax-exempt bond issuance. We don't know what interest rates are going to be like at the time that we issue. So we said, well, let's kind of look at two bookend scenarios and say, option 1 is sort of upside or best case scenario, right? Everything goes, you issue your bonds fully tax exempt. Interest rates are where they are now or better. You may have some type of credit enhancement, likely in the form of a contingent loan agreement from the county or a city or whatever sort of entity you're partnering with. What else? The sales tax projections have grown at sort of the average that we've been looking at. Sort of that's your best case scenario. And then we said, well, then let's look at the other side where the project has to be fully taxable because bond counsel or tax counsel deem that there's a private use element, so obviously a higher interest rate, and that you're not going to have any external credit enhancement. So in this downside, and I don't like saying downside scenario, but you get the picture. In this case, the PFD would issue its own bonds. And an important concept to really to latch onto here is that the PFD doesn't have the same revenue-based source that the county, right, or the city, right? So from a bondholder's perspective, their pledge is much more limited. Your payment stream is not as diverse, and if those sales tax revenues dropped considerably, there could be a risk they would be repaid, right? So just like you would have a credit score when you're buying a mortgage, the PFD's credit score is going to tend to be lower than a county or a city that has all these other sources of revenue available to it, right? So in the case of a PFD, standalone PFD financing, bondholders are likely going to want to see what we call debt service coverage. This is a really important concept because what it says is that they say, well, you have $1 of sales tax revenue, right? But you can't sell $1 of debt. You have to sell 25 cents of debt because we want to know that if those sales tax revenues fall, you're still going to have enough to cover our debt service. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's what we call debt service coverage. Whereas if you sell bonds through a county, they may provide the contingent loan agreement, which may give you the ability to sell that entire dollar of debt to really leverage that debt a little further. Now, of course, the county or any entity that you're working with would be taking on that risk that sales tax revenues drop, right? So in the world of PFD financings, we've seen both. We've seen I would say the majority of PFD financings are done with a entity providing credit enhancement, whether it's a city or county. Okay. So, again,
The county handled part of that risk, if you recall, by having us have a reserve for a full year worth of debt service at one time, $900,000, which has been subsequently been lowered to first $500,000 and then to $250,000, because even through the depth of the recession, we never missed a debt service payment. So there's reasonable confidence that we'll be able to handle our debt service under the current conditions. What we need to do is find those conditions under the new financing.
right. Any questions on that before we move forward? So, again, back to
Are
those.
any of them getting a glassy-eyed look?
No, I
yet?
think they're,
Okay, good,
they've got it.
good.
So again, these aren't, all these things here, these aren't barriers to a financing like we talked about on the prior page with the prior bonds. These are all considerations that'll impact the amount of dollars that the PFD can leverage and the amount of bonds it can sell and the projects it can fund.
I'm not sure why we only have to refinance 50% of our,
It's a good question.
oh, okay.
Great question. So the key is to have debt outstanding until 2041, right? And I actually talked to bond counsel, and they said it could be is just a few bonds. As long as there are any bonds outstanding associated with the original regional center projects out there, that should be enough to be able to legally continue to collect that rebate. Back to that pinch point that we discussed, that is really what's driving that 50% number. So there's a sort of a pinch point in the debt service that we need to take out, kind of scoop out some of the debt that you're paying in these middle years and push it out in order to be able to pay interest cost in the back end. So that's where the 50% number comes from. And that could fluctuate. If interest rates rise a lot in 2 years, you're sort of losing that capacity, and so you may need to dig deeper and maybe scoop out 75% of that debt. So it's a very good question, but.
So that really gives us more capacity in the nearer years for new projects.
Exactly.
Correct. Okay.
Okay. So again, all considerations that would affect the capacity. Back to that concept of sort of upside and downside, or best case and worst case scenario. You know, we haven't put together specific projections for each project. I know you're considering a host of projects. You may consider 2 or 3 or just 1. Or so what we said was just sort of looking at if everything goes your way and if everything is sort of that downside scenario. So that's what we're showing on slide 8 to give you an idea of what the bookends are. What's the range of projects that you can finance, right? So on the very left side, we assume that the county issues the LTGO bonds for the PFD, pledging its full faith and credit. Now, this would be a very similar situation to the PFD issues the bonds with a contingent loan agreement in place from the county. So bondholders look at that almost identically, those two credits. So in that case, maybe the county would say, well, this could be a little bit less work for us. You know, we're not actually issuing the bonds ourselves, but they're still providing their credit through the CLA. Again, the second, going down here on the left-hand side, this would also assume that the projects are fully eligible to be sold tax-exempt debt. Now, we know we have a small taxable piece, so this does assume that the outstanding bonds are sold, refinanced with taxable bonds. So a small taxable piece, but all the new projects are tax-exempt. The county agrees to one times coverage, so they say you can sell, you have $1 projected and you can sell $1 of debt. So that would be sort of the upside scenario.
Some of our bonds are taxable use our existing, you said?
They're not,
They're not.
but
They're not.
because of the changes to the tax laws that I covered in the first bullet, that change has necessitated that these bonds be sold taxable until September of 2021.
Oh, okay.
And then we see our final assumption was that the sales tax revenues grow at an average of 3.6%. That was just the average growth rate since 2002, I believe. So that's sort of the upside scenario. And then on the downside here, we assume that the PFD issues the bonds with a limited sales tax guarantee. So in this case, the bonds are only secured by the PFD sales tax rebates. There's no other external credit enhancement. There's no contingent loan agreement. The county does not issue the bonds. So like we talked about, bondholders are going to want some debt service coverage, right? They want to know that if revenues dip, if sales tax collections dip, you're going to have enough to still cover their debt service. So we assume that the bonds are sized with 1.5 times debt service coverage, and that your sales tax revenues are projected to grow at a little bit lower, 2%. We were conservative on that. So usually when you get into sizing bonds based on sort of a sales tax, usually we like to look at a more conservative assumption there. So everyone I know is familiar with history of PFD financings, you'll understand where we get that. So the results here on the bottom, you can see on the left-hand side, we've got $29 million of project funding, so pretty large number. And then on the right-hand side, all the way down to about $9.5 million. And you can see that the cost of capital there, we've got 3.3% versus 4.5% here. And then the average annual debt service. And the reason why the debt service on the right hand is so much lower is because we can only really secure a portion of those tax dollars, right? Because we need to show, again, coverage to the bondholders. Any questions?
So, Caitlin, who and how do we decide where we fall in here?
That's a great question, Walt. We need some direction, I think, from the county, or from the PFD and from the county as well. But we need some direction from all of you to tell us which projects that you're going after, which projects you'd like to dig into further, and then we can provide you some more analysis. At this point, we don't have all the information to tell you that. I'll get into sort of our requests and next steps in a couple more slides.
So this is why it's been difficult for Brian and I going through this process to tell you what that number is, because we don't know. And we don't know because you don't know. You don't know which projects that you're going to select and how much money could be awarded to each of those projects. When you decide that, then we have a marker that we can say, okay, here's the target. These are the amount of dollars that we want, and these are the projects that are going to get funded. Here's the approximate time frame when they're going to need that money. And then they can go to work. Until that time, it's still in limbo. They can't tell us exactly what the number is because we can't tell them exactly what we want.
But understanding the willingness of the county to partner would significantly change that.
Potentially, yes.
So on the next two slides, we've illustrated these concepts. So you can see here, this gray line is the projection of what we call the net sales tax, which is really just the rebate available for debt service. So we took the projected tax collections, took out operating expenses, we used a conservative growth rate, and said, okay, let's fund all the debts that we can using that sort of constraint. And then on the next page, you can see same thing, but again, we used a more conservative coverage threshold to give the market or bondholders comfort that if that sales tax revenue declines, again, there's still cushion there to pay their debt service. Just wanted to make sure we covered it.
Is the little blue dot out here at the end, is that the part of the original bonds that we have to keep outstanding in order to make sure we get the tax rebate
Exactly.
until 2041?
That's the one. In other words, we don't have to have it evenly dispersed over that time period, as long as a portion, some portion of it still remains to be paid off in 2041.
Right. Yeah. The read that we've gotten, I called a few bond counsel firms, and they said that it doesn't have to be more than $50,000 of bonds, or a few bonds really. So it's a smaller number.
That just guarantees us the revenue stream.
Exactly. So I've got a sample financing schedule here, but Mike, I feel like I've taken a lot of time. I don't know if we should skip to slide 12, because I think, we'd like to talk more about timing, but I think we need to sort of define the next steps and, like, really to your point, tell you what we think you could fund, right? And I think that's more important at this point than walking through the timing. So on slide 12, I've outlined a path forward here, so next steps in a process. And there's steps on the PFD side and then on our side as well. So, we would ask that you formally engage your financing team, and that would include tax counsel. So an expert in evaluating projects, and you sort of give them, here's the financing plan, here's the study, here's who would be using the property, and they would look at the what we call private payments test and a private use test from the IRS and say, yes, we think these could be funded with tax-exempt bonds, or no, we think they would need to be taxable bonds. And that would drive one big cost assumption for us, right? And then we would also ask that you engage the county or any other party that you may be willing to work with and talk about that CLA or that credit enhancement. That'll give us a better idea. Again, if you're telling us, yes, the county is willing to partner, then it'll be easier for us to provide you a better estimate here.
And before you go on,
yes.
When you use the word tax counsel, is that interchangeable with bond counsel, or is that different?
It's bond counsel, and then they'll have a special partner that is a tax expert. But yes, you usually probably choose one firm, and they would act as both.
So are you potentially an underwriter?
That is potentially me. And so
You're going to sell the bonds?
yes, our underwriting desk. So I didn't talk about myself at all. I just kind of dove into it. But I'm happy to give you my bio and then talk about our firm and what we do. But yeah, we're headquartered in Cleveland, but our underwriting desk is located in Chicago. So we maintain relationships with 1,500 accounts, right? And everybody from your Vanguards, your BlackRocks to some smaller firms, sort of cover the gamut, right? And that would be the end role, right? Is us selling the bonds. That is the smallest piece of the puzzle right now. I think to get there, that's sort of the celebration, right? Actually selling the bonds. We've got to sort of get through the entire financing process. So on the bottom of slide 12 here, once we've received that information, so feedback from tax counsel, feedback from the PFD regarding the estimate of projects, the financing ask for the project, and it may be an estimate. Hey, we want to provide X dollars to this project and X dollars to this project. Give us some hard numbers to work with, and then what we can do is provide you a sort of a financing matrix and say, okay, if you choose this project, you could probably fund all of it, or 75% of it, or maybe we look at a mix of projects. But we're happy to run scenarios for you based on some feedback that we get. So I would say that would be the next logical step forward to get as we kind of dig into this and give you guys better information.
And it can be a mix of bond sales and commercial lending, depending upon the requirements of each project.
Absolutely.
And what works best in order to get to where the end result is.
Absolutely. And so KeyBanc Capital Markets, we're a broker-dealer, but obviously KeyBanc, that is our affiliate company. So we are able to also provide loans, bonds, lines of credits, other products beyond bonds. So just a great point. I've got a lot of other information in here. My bio's in the back, case studies for PFD transactions that we've worked on, market information, timeline. But I know I've run over my allotted time, so feel free to review. Great bedtime reading tonight. And if you have any questions, you have my card. I'm happy to, anytime, just give me a call. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. But if there's any questions right now, we can walk through those.
I met Caitlin at a PFD annual meeting in which she was there and spoke with her. And now you know why I was very impressed with Caitlin and contacted her with Brian in order to meet and find out more about what KeyBanc Capital Markets may be able to do in helping us in that process. So Mark, very smartly.
And then I'll note, we've got references in the back. Like I just mentioned, we just closed a financing for a PFD a couple months ago, and we've worked on a number of other PFD financings, so feel free to call anyone and ask about
Okay.
this.
Thank you, Kate.
All right, thank you.
Caitlin, thank you very, very much
All right,
for
Mike.
responding on short notice and being able to be here.
Yep, planes, trains, and automobiles, and a ferry, I made it.
Yeah.
Good evening, board members, Mike and Brian. Thanks for having me here. I'm Dave Tragesser, I'm Managing Director with DA Davidson, and I've been asked to come and not only kind of reintroduce myself, because I do see a few familiar faces here from years ago, but also talk about my firm and talk about maybe a roadmap forward for you when you look at the amount of money that you can generate from a bond sale or multiple bond sales. So I plan on maybe 15, 20 minutes and then answer your questions. I did provide a little handout here. And first of all, on page 1, just to introduce D.A. Davidson. If you're not familiar with us, we're the largest full-service investment banking firm in the West. We're actually based in beautiful Great Falls, Montana. But I work out of Seattle. And you can see just our local offices here. We've grown a lot in the last few years through both acquisitions and internally. We currently have almost 1,400 employees, 92 offices around the country, $50 billion in assets. But our core business in my department is public finance. We are a full-service firm, but our public finance group is deeply committed to the issuers here in the Pacific Northwest. You'll see some numbers that substantiate that. Page 2, we are ranked number 1 for the last 5 years doing public finance work here in Washington. We've got a very deep bench of colleagues that I work with that are professional in this business, that have been in the business a long time. I'll be talking about one of them later, but she used to, Maura Lentini in our office, used to work for Moody's Investor Service, so she works with me on the credit aspect of bonds, looking at what is rateable, what can be marketed based on that rating, so we can determine what type of bond issue could be brought to the market and to maximize the bond proceeds that you need for your projects. We were formed in 1935 from just one office, and we've grown since then. You can see our rankings on page 3. Last 5 years, we're number 1. We did over 259 different tax-exempt deals last year. In Washington, number 1, $1.2 billion of bonds throughout the state. I work with 3 other bankers I've been doing it for 34 years, but each of those bankers has been doing it for over 30. And so we back up each other. If one's gone, we have a deep bench that if any question comes up, because we've all been in Washington over that time period, we've encompassed, run across every type of financing that's been done in Washington State. Even though I work in Seattle, I live here in Kitsap, and we're deeply committed to all the issuers in the county. You can kind of see who they all are. I think we work with almost all of them. I work with all the cities. We did the financing for the fast ferries. We're currently working on another bond deal for City of Bremerton currently. Port Orchard Mayor is here. We just did the financing for Tremont. Their financing last year. So we're, as you can see, we're very committed to the community. Our scope of services will vary depending on what you want. I've listed some of those on page 5. These are kind of the breadth of all the services we provide, whether it's acting as underwriter, placement agent, advisor, helping with disclosure. We work with all the bond counsels. You'll be needing a bond counsel opinion for this transaction. We work with all those folks, and we'll be looking at different ways to do either interim or long-term financing, depending on what you want, and doing that on a fixed or variable basis in consideration of all your outstanding bonds. We'll be talking about that in a minute. We also help districts with their financial policies, help them put those in place. So when you do come to the bond market, financial policies are one credit factor that the rating agencies looked at to give you a good credit rating. And so we'll be talking about that later on as well.
I should know this, but how are our existing bonds rated?
your existing bonds, and I'll actually get to that, your existing bonds were actually sold via interlocal agreement through the county back in 2002 and then refinanced in 2011. So they're currently issued under the county's LTGO, Limited Tax General Obligation Credit Rating. And the county is a very highly rated credit. They're AA2, AA. The ratings weren't as good when the bonds were issued, but they're currently AA2, AA's, which is a very strong credit rating. Okay.
So that translates into a better interest rate.
Exactly. In our world, the higher the credit rating, the lower the borrowing costs, because investors demand a higher yield for taking more perceived risk. So the lower the rating is a perceived higher risk, so they demand a higher interest rate. So the highest credit rating we can attain, the lower your borrowing costs, the more you can leverage your sales tax money. If you use less of it for debt service, you can use more of it for something else. Or you can leverage it to a higher level and get a higher principal amount of bonds with that lower credit rating. My resume is noted here on page 6. We work with quite a number of PFDs as well. To give you a little history, I've done work for Bellingham and Grace Harbor, refinancing PFD bonds there. Currently working with Linwood PFD. Also, we helped the city of Wenatchee navigate out of their PFD problems from years ago. And so Wenatchee is now back to strong investment grade ratings, where they were dragged down by the PFD's default of their notes back in 2012.
Yeah. Dude had a lot of guts getting into the middle of that.
City of Wenatchee is a great client, and they're doing great now, and the PFD is doing great now too. Their cash flow. We're actually thinking about refinancing some of the bonds that were done right after to get out of their default. Now it's cash flowing so well that they can probably refinance those at much lower interest rates. So
I'm glad to hear that.
yeah. I mentioned some of the members of my team. We also have one of the only underwriting and trading desk for municipal bonds in the Pacific and Seattle market is in our office. Mark Ferrer runs it. He's our market maker. He's the fellow that helps put interest rates on the bonds and has the commitment to buy the bonds and then resell them to investor. He's not in New York. He's not in LA. He's in Seattle, and he's been doing it for 33 years. And so that's one of my other partners. Walt asked about the other bonds. Here's a snapshot on page 7 of the original bond deal for the PFD in 2002. You note a couple things at the bottom. One of the things that's not, the issuer, Kitsap County. These were insured by AMBEC back in the day. Bond insurance was a huge part of our market back, 17 years ago. That's not the case today. With the financial crisis, there are very few bond insurers left, and the value of bond insurance has been reduced. So that makes it even more important that the PFD can get an investment grade rating on its own credit. There's not the support of very much bond insurance anymore, although there's just a few folks left in that market. Interest rates, that'll be a big factor for how much you can leverage. This graph on page 8 is kind of confusing. I'll walk you through it. This is a 10-year history of what we call our AAA benchmark, which is highly rated bonds. The top blue line is 20-year fixed rate financing. The middle line is 10-year, and the 1-year is on the bottom. So as you can see, short-term rates have gone up a lot in the last few years, with the Fed easing and interest rates going up. But long-term fixed rates are actually coming down. And that's what's important to you, because you're going to be issuing most likely some long-term fixed rate bonds to lock in those interest rates and give you long-term financing for your projects as you move forward. So if you go down this list, you can see the 40-year low for rates was in July of 2016, kind of a dip in that market for the blue line. We're not that far from it right now. Rates have been coming down this year. So timing is all good. Importantly for you, at page 9, here's a little roadmap for determining how much bond proceeds you can leverage. We'd work with your finance team, and you need to select bond counsel and any other players that you'd like. We're proposing to be underwriter for the bonds. We go back, we look at your historical cash flow for the sales tax. We look at your projected sales tax numbers. We want to be conservative with those numbers. We'd evaluate what we call that debt service coverage, which is the cash flow that you'd have available to make debt service payments from your sales and use tax. You want to show at least a 150 coverage to get an investment grade rating. We look at both short-term financing, say you needed some money now, you needed to borrow some, but you're going to be issuing a lot more needs 6 months from now, years from now. Maybe you want to do some short-term financing to get you some immediate cash, and then we'll be taking that out with bonds when you're going to be really have a good drawdown schedule for how you expect to spend the proceeds later on. We'll look at all those options, both short-term and long-term, and we'll need your drawdown schedule, how you expect to spend those monies on a monthly basis. That way we can comply with federal tax rules, and we can also maximize investment earnings for those bond proceeds when you're not using them. Importantly, we're going to evaluate how these bonds will be issued. Will they be issued by the county? Probably not, but we don't know for sure. If they are, they would carry the credit ratings of the county, which are a little higher. But and then you would have a similar, what we call an interlocal agreement with the county to pledge the sales and use tax, similar to what you did before. If you're going to be issuing your bonds on what we call a standalone basis, PFD issues sales tax bonds, that can be done. We also wrap those around or consider your outstanding bonds. As I mentioned, the 2002 bonds were refinanced in 2011. We could do a couple things. In today's world, I don't want to get too technical here, but the federal government eliminated the ability for PFDs and other municipalities to advance refund their outstanding bonds. And when I say advance refund, that means issue new refunding bonds before the call date of those old bonds, more than 90 days. And your old bonds have a 12/1/21 call date. So 2.5 years from now, you can't call those bonds in and pay them off, tell them. So, now there is talk in the infrastructure bill in Congress of allowing districts to advance refund bonds again, because they took this, in the Tax Reform Act of a year and a half ago, they took that away. They did no favors for you. The federal government did no favors. So we'd evaluate either waiting till the call date to refinance those bonds, because we could extend the maturity of those bonds to the new longer call, new date of the new state law, the 15-year extension of the sales tax. That could provide additional cash flow. We could alternatively wrap the new bonds around your existing debt service and not refinance the bonds. We'd evaluate that option. Or we could look at some type of hybrid, and I've listed them here. People in our market are always creative. So we could look at doing some type of taxable refunding. We could do that now. We just could have to do any tax-exempt refunding under the current law. We could look at taxable refunding, or what we call a forward delivery bond, or other synthetic structures that are kind of complicated. But we could look at all that as a way to maximize your cash flow so you can leverage your extended sales tax. With that, once we work with your team, everybody gets comfortable with the assumptions and the methodology, then we start what we call the due diligence portion of the project. As underwriter, we're required to what we call kick the tires, due diligence, work with the finance team on the disclosure, which is the information provided to investors when they evaluate this credit. And then that information, we propose to be kind of the quarterback. We work with the team and go to the bond rating agency and do all the rating preparation with your staff, and then make a presentation to one of the rating agencies to get an investment grade rating. And once all that is completed, the disclosure documents are released to investors, and a bond pricing date is set, and on that pricing date, interest rates are locked in, and your debt service is locked in. That process typically takes 3 to 4 months from start to finish. If you're at a point where you've determined that you will need cash, 3 to 4 months for that project. I've given you a lot of information. Hopefully, because I was number 2 tonight, you got some of that information preliminarily, and so you didn't all hit you up at once. But I very much appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your team, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have about either D.A. Davidson, my team, or the process for issuing some bonds.
So it's, Dave, it's to our financial advantage to have the county issue the bonds if we can make that agreement with the county. Is that the case?
The county has, if they agree to issue the bonds as LTGO bonds, their credit rating is higher than yours would be. That, they may have some requirements too. I don't know if the county would put any other requirements, but if you're just comparing interest rates to interest rates, a county-issued financing will provide the lowest borrowing cost. And the reason for that is they're a known issuer in the market. They have an outstanding high credit rating. They're evaluated by 2 rating agencies. They're putting their full faith and credit behind bonds. They may not want to do that for a variety of reasons. Yeah. But if they did, it would provide the lowest borrowing cost, in my opinion.
And that's what we did with the 2002
And 11.
bonds. Yeah, no,
But the world has changed since 2011. And, you know.
And there's different commissioners.
Different commissioners. The PFD market has changed since 2011. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the county would do. The county is not currently, in spirit of full disclosure, the county is not currently a client of mine. I did work for the county, you know, back, I did the original deal, but I'm not working with them currently. So, I want to get that on the table.
I have a question. The previous presenter indicated a couple times that the projects that we were considering would be rated, could be rated differently depending upon, I don't know what.
She's talking about private use component.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple things there. When you say private use, under the federal tax law, bonds have to be issued for a governmental purpose or have a certain percentage of it as what we call bad money, like 10%. So if you've got if you're issuing bonds for a project that will benefit a for-profit company, that depending on the use of the facility, I mean, will the facility be open to the public? Will it be? These are all issues that I don't opine on. What you will be hiring a bond counsel, a legal firm, and they have to provide opinion that pursuant to the federal tax law that the projects being financed can be done on a tax-exempt basis, or if they cannot, they could be done on a taxable basis. But the interest rate is higher. In today's world, it's about 1.5% higher for taxable financing versus tax-exempt. Does that make sense?
Depending on the proportion of the project.
That is not governmental use.
Private use, it could put it into a taxable
Correct.
license. And not
Yeah,
taxable.
and that's not my call. Bond counsel makes that call based on your disclosures of the use of the projects, how it'll be used. And then they'll work, they have a special tax counsel that evaluates that.
But it doesn't mean there can be no private use of it. There's just some
There are
hurdles
rules,
you
there
have
are
to get
rules,
over.
and there are allocations done based on what's governmental and what's private use. Say, for example, you're building a new city hall, but you're gonna lease out the bottom floor to Subway. They do an allocation based on the square footage and say, look, 80% of it is city hall, that's governmental purpose, 80% of it can be done, tax exempt. Or maybe a little more because there was a certain amount of quote bad money that's allowed under those rules. But that's the type of analysis that bond counsel will go through based on your projects. If it's a park project or, a lot of those things are truly governmental purpose and there's not an issue being done tax exempt. But when you have partnerships, it can be more iffy. That's why I'd encourage you to retain bond counsel as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because, and they're not gonna charge you more for getting on the board earlier. It's always an advantage, so you can have their advice and review of those stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If the county decides that they would issue bonds for the PFD, does the PFD need a bond underwriter?
Probably not. You could have an advisor.
Okay.
to represent your interests.
Oh, but we'd use the county underwriter.
The county would be in control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You betcha. It's their bond, it's their base, they'd be in control of the, I mean, you can always negotiate with the county on different things, but if they're the issuer, they're primarily in control.
So does DA Davidson provide both services, that is financial advisor and bond underwriter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do act in that capacity for different issuers. There are rules, compliance rules in our business stating that I have to be fully transparent. I can't switch my hat from one to another because there are fiduciary rules related to being a financial advisor. And then if I'm an underwriter, I'm not in a fiduciary relationship. I'm in a relationship where I have to be fair to all parties. That's the way it is in our business. So if you decide to go down that other path, we'd have to talk about it. Yeah, it's a very hot issue in the compliance world today. The roles between being a quote financial advisor, a fiduciary to an issuer, and then being an underwriter, which is really a market maker. An underwriter is buying and selling bonds, buying them from you, selling to investors. We're required under securities rules to be fair to both parties. That's the way it works. And so, as a financial advisor, the role is strictly to be an advisor to the issuer. So that's the separation.
And can you switch from one to the other?
Not with the same issuer. If you started down that path, it shouldn't be. For the same project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I could, I mean, a year from now, or a different project, I could be one or the other. And I've already, and as Mike mentioned, I've already provided the district with a compliance, what we call a preliminary non-binding underwriter engagement letter, where I disclose all the stuff. And if you decide to move forward and select me to be underwriter, I'm required to provide you with what we call a full-blown underwriter disclosure engagement letter, which is like twice as long.
Which is binding, as opposed to the first one, which is non-binding.
I will tell you this, technically, it doesn't say non-binding, but any you have with an underwriter, say for example, we start working together and working on a project, and for some reason the deal just falls apart, goes away. You won't owe me anything. Because every underwriter knows that if there's not a bond deal, there's not the money. Because typically we're paid as a percentage of the bond deal when and if it's ever passed. But it doesn't say preliminary non-binding on the letter. That's just practice in the industry that we do.
So David, I'm a little confused about how we put this together.
Okay.
We have 7 projects.
Yeah.
I don't think all of them are going to be selected for funding. But let's say we end up with 4 projects that we want to fund. How do you package that in a bond issue that we can allocate? We can even know ahead of time how much we want to allocate to each project, but how do you put all of that together in one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so as I mentioned, the first thing we do is we do that kind of cash flow analysis, see how much money you really have to leverage. As we come to a conclusion that, say we can leverage $10 million. Then we go back and ask you for what we call the drawdown schedule, how you expect to spend for those 4 projects on like a monthly, quarterly basis. How would you spend the money for those projects? And what's the likelihood of those expenditures being over those monthly periods? Once we have that estimate from you, we consolidate that and size it into a bond deal or a note issue, interim financing, and come back and provide you some alternatives to make that work. So it would be packaging those projects that have a similar timing. Under federal tax rules, you are required to have a reasonable expectation when you issue bonds that you will spend at least 85% of those proceeds within a 3-year period. That's a minimum. A lot of people decide to, think that they can spend the proceeds quicker than that, because in today's world, we're issuing bonds. Say you issue long-term fixed-rate bonds at 3.2%. Bonds are fixed at 3.2%. You get those proceeds at bond closing, $10 million of bond proceeds. Then you invest those proceeds based on your drawdown schedule. You can invest out in the LGIP, the Kitsap County has a pool, you can invest it out, and then you spend it down. Luckily, in today's world, that difference between what you're borrowing for, the 3.2%, and what you're investing is not very great. A few years ago, it was big.
Yeah.
So there was a negative incentive for you to issue bonds early because you'd be borrowing at a higher rate than what you're earning during that construction draw period. We call that negative arbitrage. So today's world, it's not that bad. But we would, to answer your question specifically, we would get that drawdown schedule, we'd run it in our models, we determine what that interest earnings would be over that construction period, if there's any negative arbitrage, and try to maximize that so you can, once you spend the proceeds, that you've done pretty well on that estimate. We don't want to issue too many bonds too soon because of that. But we have to be cognizant of being close to 40-year low fixed rate interest rates too. And the more bonds you issue now, you lock in those rates. And that could maximize your cash flow based on your limited sales taxes,
You're not allowed to have positive arbitrage.
Correct.
Yeah, I asked that question.
Yeah.
Caitlin.
Yeah. If you're a very small issuer, you can. But not, if you're issuing $10 million of bonds or more, you're not going to, unless you comply with what we call more technical. Unless you comply with, there's some exceptions to the arbitrage rebate rule. If you can spend the money within a 2-year period and you meet 6-month drawdown schedules that are specified under the code, then you potentially could earn some arbitrage, but not a lot of people can comply with all those rules.
I don't think we're sophisticated enough to figure
Well,
that out.
It's, yeah.
You may be, but
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other questions?
Nope.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
over. Okay, facility reports from the executive director.
yeah, you do have a report in your folders from the Kitsap Conference Center. And let's see, I'm looking for my copy here. Anyway, the conference center is doing very well. You heard earlier somebody say that the conference center hasn't made any money since it was built. Actually, this year they are, or at least in some months they are. They didn't in February, of course, because they had some events canceled. But they're doing much better. They are booking more events. They are booking longer events. They are able to work more easily than they have before with the hotels and getting some longer-term bookings with the help of the Kitsap Visitor and Convention Bureau with Visit Kitsap Peninsula. They just booked an environmental conference for about 150 people. It's going to be almost a week-long conference. And the reason that they did so is because of the where we're located and the fact that we have standing forests that they can walk in when they're here. We have a water trail around the peninsula. We have gardens and all kinds of things there. They love our location and the things that we have to offer in addition to just conference facilities. So that's a real kudo. And hopefully that will be a demographic that they can market to in the future. So they are doing much better. Hopefully they'll wind up with a profitable year and a feather in their cap for being able to do that. I actually did get a report from the county, but it appears that I didn't get that copied into your packets. And I don't remember the details of that. To be able to report. The only other thing that's on the agenda in that same area is my activity report, which gives you an idea of the things that I've been involved with over the last couple of months. And part of that has been obviously preparation for the presentations that were made by the various projects, but it's also been the work that Brian and I have been doing in order to respond to the PRA request from the county. Brian did submit a response to the county from their last request, which was an expansion of their original PRA request. Have you gotten anything back from them?
I have not, so I'm taking, no news is good news, and if they have a issue or concern, they need to reach out to me.
Is this the one where they ask for texts?
Text, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were 5 additional items they asked, which were duplicative of earlier ones, and I think, again, one of the practices in the PRA world is when you provide a response, the burden really is on the requester to contact you if they think that you haven't been responsive or there's something else they want, so.
And they did that to our original request.
Yeah.
And requested additional information, most of which we couldn't supply because there wasn't any other information. Brian did do a more extensive review of the documents and communications. And there were a lot more of the emails and or documents that were exempted from for client attorney-client privilege than the original list that we supplied them. And Brian's office did all of that work. I didn't have to do that.
Okay, anything else to report?
Anything else is on the comment on the PRA?
No.
Okay. Nope. I think we are complete. Well, the one thing, I guess, I think this is something to take up in executive committee because it has to deal with the project evaluation process.
Okay.
We hadn't scheduled any discussion of that tonight.
Okay, announcements or upcoming events?
No,
Okay.
unless any of you have any?
Thank you for scheduling these, they were very helpful.
Yeah.
I guess the one other thing that I did send out some inquiries about the site visits, and I'd given 2 possible dates. One was the 1st and 2nd of June, and the people that had replied that they could do that. There were 3 of the directors that could do that. I hadn't heard from you, Pat, so.
And neither one of those worked for me.
Okay.
I thought I sent them.
Maybe you did. I'd have to go back and check. I don't think I have you checked off, so I'll go back and check the emails that I'd received. I think everybody else here had replied. So if you want me to, I can go ahead and schedule a series of site visits for those 3 or 4 people that have responded for that weekend. Now, it's not going to cover everybody on the board, so the question I have is, shall I continue to try to find additional dates where other board members, now these were scheduled on weekends. Is that typically bad for some of you? Should I schedule one during the week or try to get other board members on that? How much effort do I need to spend and try to get as many board members as possible to be able to make the site visits, or am I wasting too much time trying to do this?
So my question is, you did send out the email about the June dates that.
Correct.
And how many of the board members said they could make any of those dates?
There were 3 board members that said they could make the June 1st or 2nd date, and none that said they could do the.
So my question to the board is this something we really want to pursue? I mean, what is the value of it? And if we have, 3 board members that go to all of the, or some of them, are we being unfair to the other projects that don't get a visit? It just seems to me that there's a lot of downside in trying to put this together. I mean, what if we get 4 members that go, for instance, to the CK School project, and nobody goes to the Kitsap Legacy Park, and 2 board members go to Bainbridge Island, and is that fair to all the projects?
The plan was that for the ones that are able to do that, I'd said that, we try to do this in a 3 or 4 hour stretch, and we hit all 7 components. And that was predicated on being able to go there and not necessarily interact with anybody from the project. We could arrange to have somebody, a person from the project there and meet us. I was concerned about the scheduling to try to have somebody from the project standing by until we got there. We were trying to make sure that we got all 7 projects in a 3 to 4 hour stretch in one day.
I don't think you can do that.
No, that's going to be tough, just the driving time alone.
Yeah, you're not going to get 7 projects in one day.
No, that's going to be an all-day thing.
Well, I'd get you to 7 projects in one day.
Well, but if somebody's there, you can better believe there's got to be some presentation, some questions, and it's not going to be you go there and boom, then you leave and go to the next one.
Yeah.
Well, some of the sites are, in Paulsbo, it's undeveloped. All you're looking at is a piece of land. This is where it's going to be visualized what's there. Heritage Park, what we're talking about is, again, there's little there. We can go to the point by driving through a back access road to where the ride park's going to be. We could see that, but I wasn't planning on having a guide that's going to take up a half an hour explaining, and if that's what you're looking for, is somebody to be there to explain about what we're looking at, then yeah, I agree. We're not going to be able to do that in a day.
For me, the presentations have been really good. I mean, I don't have any questions that a site visit's going to answer for me that I haven't got from the presentations. It's just how I feel.
Well, I can say that a visit to the Bainbridge Island Aquatic Center and to look at the proposed site for the new pool, you can go and visit a parking lot. I'm just not sure if that's
Yeah.
going to be helpful.
Well, I wasn't sure either, but I was requested to try and arrange site visits because if we were gonna do one site visit, we should do all
I agree.
site visits.
Right. That's exactly right.
But if the conclusion of the board at this point is that trying to arrange 7 site visits for all 7 board members may be logistically impossible or logistically very difficult. So particularly if we have different members at different times at different sites, that's a nightmare for the project teams to be able to try to accommodate that, in my opinion.
And I think to visit and just look at something, if you don't have somebody there to help orient you as to what you're looking at and what's going to go where, it's not very useful. You say it's looking in a parking lot,
That's right.
maybe an idea this time has not come.
So
Well,
Rick,
that's
what do you
up to
think?
you guys.
I'm kind of agreeing with Pat. Even at Central Kitsap, what there is to see there is a building. And there's really nothing else to see. So I think we've got a lot to do. We ought to just skip it individually. We could see these properties if we feel like it or have an interest in it.
Well, there's only 5 of us here, but I just don't think this is gonna work. I just think it's gonna take time for Mike to try to put something together that's not gonna be valuable to what he's doing, I don't think. And it just seems to me, and if we don't get all 7 members there, or if we don't get to all of the projects, or some members go to this one and not to the other, and you're not gonna do it in one day, Mike. I'm sorry.
Well,
You know,
if all we
just
wanted
not
to do
gonna
was to
happen.
visit the sites, I could do that in one day. It may not be in 3 or 4 hours, but I can do that. But
Then we run into a fairness
otherwise, we
issue, I
have
think.
Nolan come along and film everything that we do, and we can put it up on the website.
I mean, we could just cancel the site visits. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm all right with that too.
So is it?
I'm sorry, you said that you're okay with...
I'm okay canceling the site visits.
Okay. So
And I.
a consensus of everybody here tonight, let's tell Mike to get off of this.
Yes.
And not do it. Okay, there you go.
We can do things.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't stop anybody. If you want to go up and look at whatever project, it doesn't stop you from doing that on your own. I mean,
Sure.
that's not a.
So if I want to go look at the parking lot in Bainbridge, I can... do
I'd be happy to show it to
that.
All right.
All right, well, thank you. I needed some guidance on that, and I appreciate your feedback, because I was struggling with this.
All right. Any other upcoming events?
Nope.
Okay.
It seems like we need to sort of step up the pace on locating a bond counsel based on what we
Yes,
heard tonight.
definitely.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Sounds like
So I'm
we
not
need
sure what
that
that
before
next
really
step
anything.
is, if that's
Well, may I
two of you
brief
guys.
you on that?
Yes,
So,
please.
so it was probably starting a year ago, this was on my to-do list, but not on the top of it, obviously. But intermittently over the last year, I've kind of looked at, there's a half dozen firms in Seattle at least that do public finance, but I've really been looking at who are the ones that aren't underwriting for the state or the city of Seattle, who are the ones that really focus on special purpose districts, which is us. And I think there's 2 relevant firms, firm of Foster Pepper and the firm of Pacifica Law Group. I have had just really distant conversations with both of them, simply saying, I'm a representative of Kitsap PFD. We may need bond counsel. Is that something you could help us with? Tell me a little bit about what your public finance practice. So I've done that. And then today I was anticipating this, and so I actually reached out to the Foster Pepper firm, and I'll explain why if you want to know. But I reached out to them and said, I think it's getting more imminent that the PFD will be looking at bond counsel. Would you run a conflicts check? Here's who the other participants are in these projects. Can you run a conflicts check to tell us whether you represent any of those or not? Can you give us some indication of your availability and your rates? And I received a communication later this afternoon that said they're on it and they will get back to me very soon with the answers to those questions. So I think we can move pretty quickly in that direction. Probably the next meeting I could just make it, Mike and I could make a recommendation, one firm or, here's two firms, and you guys decide what you want from those two.
Would you ask the other firm that you mentioned kind of the same question?
Yeah.
That's good enough.
So, if we did work a deal out with the county, we would not need a bond counsel.
That's a great question. I've been spinning that through my head as we were sitting here tonight. I think we might want one anyway to do
think
some of the
so.
negotiation with the county on how that would work, because that's beyond my skill set. And I just remember from 2002, it was basically a take it or leave it proposition. The county basically said, we'll do the bonds, thank you very much. And there really was no role for the PFD to play.
Wouldn't we possibly need them to look at the public-private?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good point too, because again, the world has changed, and with that tax change, and we know at least one of the projects has a major private component. And we don't know enough about some of the other ones. The Port Orchard one, is there going to be a subway in a public area or whatever? So yeah, I think it would make sense to get someone involved and guiding the board on that, and then they're at the table with the county. If the county says, well, none of your projects qualify, blah, 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 we have an advocate there who'll say, no, you're wrong, here's our analysis, and can represent our interest at the table. So that's my thought.
Okay.
And if we end up going with the county, probably the role of the bond counsel is this rather than this, if the PFD was going to issue its own bonds.
But I think as far as general counsel is concerned, Brian's fine, but when we're in the middle of very critical financial considerations, dealing with bonds, even if the county's selling them, I think we should be represented by bond counsel in that transaction, even if it's in that narrower role.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Dave, you said we wouldn't need an underwriter necessarily, but we'd need a bond counsel.
If the county is the issuer of the bonds, they control how the bonds are sold. They'll select their own underwriter.
Yep.
All right, so along that line, I'm going to talk to Darren and see if he and I can arrange a meeting with the chairman of the commission and bring this discussion forward and get an answer from him. So I'll talk to Darren. I think he's coming back Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah.
So, I'll talk to him and see if we can get a meeting with, I think, Ed Wolf. Is Ed or Bob?
It's Ed.
Ed is chair,
Yeah.
so we'll try and get a meeting with him.
As you instructed me, I did reach out to Meredith and to Ed, sent them an email. I did not call. I didn't get a response. I sent a second email and said I tried to reach you and I didn't get a response. I didn't get a response to the second inquiry, so I'm not
I'll
sure
talk to
what the
Darren and try and get that.
circumstances are, but, yeah.
Perhaps we can have an answer by the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, any other,
So,
anything for the good of the order? All right, our next meeting is June 10th, right here in this room, 5:30. Meeting adjourned.